Hi, seventh grade. I want to spend a few minutes today talking about dominant and recessive traits. A number of you, as you've been doing these written exercises in the textbook on this Chapter 3 genetics unit that we're doing, have had some questions and there's been some confusion regarding if certain combinations are combined together, what do they look like, what should they be, how many of them do you get. All of these questions will be answered over the next probably 2 weeks or so as we cover more material in the course. So what I want to do right now, I want to talk to you about the difference between a dominant trait and a recessive trait. Now, your book uses the word traits and genes interchangeably. The traits are an actual feature. They're a physical feature about the way you look, whether it's eye color, hair color. Again, those would be examples of traits. The genes are what make those traits come out in you. And any trait that you have, you get half your genes from your mom, half your genes from your dad. So if you have brown hair, for example, it means that you received dominant genes from mom and dominant genes from dad, or you received a combination of one dominant one and one recessive one to give you that brown hair. But at any rate, every trait you have, whether it's, again, eye color, hair color, whether or not your earlobes, for example, are attached or they're detached, um, any of those kinds of traits, you receive those from your parents, and you received half the genes from mom, half the genes from dad. When you talk about a dominant trait, you always, when you refer to the genes that make up that trait, you always use a capital letter to express them. Today we're going to talk about P's because P's happen to be the topic that is in your textbook. So you'll notice my silly pun already. I have P's, please. There are two ways that you can show dominance in a trait. You can be a purebred. That means you got a dominant trait from mom and a dominant trait from dad. So if you have dark brown hair, for example, chances are you receive both of those dominant color traits from each parent, and it makes that trait a purebred. In your book, they talk about P's. P's can either be smooth or they can be wrinkled. And if it's a smooth trait, it means it's dominant. And if that P has two dominant smooth genes, we call it a purebred. And it's expressed with two capital letters. It can also be a hybrid. It means that it received a dominant trait from one parent and a recessive trait from the other parent. But that dominant trait is still going to come out. If you're a wrinkled P, it means you receive two recessive traits, one from mom and one from dad. And by the way, the only way that you can be a wrinkled P is to get both of those recessive traits. Okay? There's no other combination for that. Now, the last thing I want to go over with you is in order to express those traits, we use something called a Punnett square. And in the next screencastify that you watch, we're going to talk about how you actually express things on a Punnett square and what they look like. So to recap, all I want to say to you is this. Genes can either be dominant or recessive. If it's a dominant gene, it means it's the gene that you're always going to see. The only time you can actually see a recessive trait is if you get both of those genes from mom and dad. And genes will always be in pairs. One from mom, one from dad. So again, dominant genes can either be purebred, where both letters are capitalized. By the way, recessive genes are also purebred also because you're receiving both small letters, but it's a recessive trait. Hybrids, on the other hand, receive both the capital letter and the smaller letter, which means they received one dominant and one recessive. So purebreds can either be dominant or they can be recessive. Hybrids can only ever be dominant because it's always the capital letter that's going to have the final say. All right, stay tuned for the second screencastify.